Well, look at that. It's 2020. The start of a new decade and the end of another one. A lot can change in 10 years, even our games. Today, I want to talk about how the racing game genre has changed throughout the 2010s, discuss the current state of it, and what we could expect to see happen in the next 10 years. The way I see it, the 2010s were a challenging decade for racing games compared to past decades. In my opinion, the 2010s were a time of great innovation, but also a period of uncertainty for developers, publishers, and players alike, in terms of how the genre would adapt and evolve as time went on. When it came to innovation, a major focus in the last decade in the racing game genre, and I guess gaming in general, was online connectivity. We caught a glimpse of this at the start of the decade with the auto-log system in 2010's Need for Speed Hot Pursuit, which seamlessly made a record of your performance in events and then showed them to your friends, creating immediate competitivity without needing to launch into a separate multiplayer mode. As the decade went on, features similar to auto-log would only become more and more present, to the point where in some cases the line between single player and multiplayer would become completely absent. We saw a glimpse of this in 2013's Need for Speed Rivals, but this would become a core aspect of a game like 2014's The Crew, where you will be seamlessly switching in and out of multiplayer lobbies. This was also the decade in which the open world racing game really found its wheels, thanks to the debut of Forza Horizon as well as The Crew. Each entry in the Forza Horizon series so far has taken us to a best of amalgamation of whichever setting was featured in that specific game. Name me another game where I could drive along Victoria's Great Ocean Road in a customized skyline, and then drive on up to Surface Paradise in minutes. It's unrealistic, but who cares? It's a lot more fun than driving through Sydney. And of course, who could forget The Crew's gigantic reimagination of the United States of America? It's honestly incredible to see how open worlds are now much larger and more detailed now than they ever were before. Speaking of detail, thanks to physically based rendering and photogrammetry, our racing games are now more beautiful than they ever were before. Take Need for Speed 2015 for example. There are times where this game just looks photorealistic. This game is over 4 years old and just look at it. This decade, we were also introduced to a whole new way of experiencing racing games, especially sim racing games, and that is of course virtual reality. While VR is still in its early years, the impact it has had on the sim racing scene cannot be understated. It's completely changed how people play sim racing games to the point where it's almost expected that any new sim racing game must support VR. Speaking of sim racing, this decade we also started to see sim racing titles have a bit more mainstream success, as games like Project Cars and Dirt Rally are introducing more and more people into sim racing. You know it's working when I, someone who purely played arcade racing games in the past, now owns a steering wheel to experience these games as they were originally intended. While we're on the topic of expanding audiences, Microsoft made big strides in this department in the last decade thanks to the Xbox Play Anywhere program, which means that now every future Xbox game will now also release on PC. As I'm sure you're aware, this has resulted in Forza now arriving on PC. Aside from this resulting in more people playing Forza, the real reason I wanted to bring this up in this video is that Forza features crossplay between Xbox and PC, meaning that regardless of where you and your friends play Forza, you can all play together with no issues. While Forza wasn't the first game to have this feature by any means, it's worth bringing up because nowadays, crossplay is a pretty hot topic, which has resulted in the latest entry in the Call of Duty series, Modern Warfare, having full cross-platform play with PS4, Xbox One, and PC. This is such a fantastic feature in my opinion, and hopefully this means that more and more games, including future racing games, will now feature crossplay across all platforms from now on. So with all these new ways of experiencing and enjoying racing games, you might be wondering, what is there to be worried about? It's a fair question, and it's not going to be easy for me to answer because there are various perspectives on the issue, and I'm just going about this from a player's point of view, and that is the issue of stagnation within the racing game genre, resulting in a reduced number of racing games being released compared to past decades, as well as a reduced number of racing games being sold in stores. In the 2000s, racing games were on top of the world. Need for Speed was everywhere and hitting sales numbers the series has since been unable to reach. Every major publisher was releasing some kind of racing game. Rockstar had Midnight Club and Smuggler's Run. THQ had Juiced. The Learning Company had Alpha Ready to Race. But as time went on, our racing games started becoming more and more of a niche product compared to other genres. While major first-party series like Gran Turismo and Forza do still manage to find success, for example, Gran Turismo Sport managed to sell 8 million copies apparently, and Forza Horizon 4 had the strongest debut in the series' history. But third-party racing games, those being the kind that isn't published or endorsed by a Sony, Microsoft or Nintendo, aren't doing as well as they used to. What's worse is that during the decade we have witnessed the shutdown of development studios that previously made racing games, as well as the conclusion of long-running series that weren't able to find their wheels in the 2010s. Following the release of 2010's Blur, Bizarre Creations, the studio responsible for the Project Gotham Racing series, were shut down, and their planned sequel to Blur would end up cancelled. Also in 2010, BlackRock Studio, the developers of that year's Split Second, were also shut down, and their planned sequel to Split Second was, you guessed it, cancelled. In 2011, we saw the release of the last mainline entry in Ubisoft's Driver series with Driver San Francisco. In addition to that, in 2011 we also saw the final main entry in Sony's MotorStorm franchise with MotorStorm Apocalypse. The studio behind MotorStorm, Evolution Studios, proceeded to shut down in 2016 with their last game Drive Club being delisted from the PlayStation Store in August of 2019, with plans for the game's online service to be shut down on the 31st of March this year. After the studio shut down, the team would then be hired at Codemasters, where they'd go on to work on an arcade racer called Onrush, which also didn't do too well, resulting in some people having to leave, causing the studio to become a support studio for Codemasters' other projects, and of course, leaving the PC version in development hell. In 2012, we sadly saw the last mainline entry to Bandai Namco's Ridge Racer series, with Ridge Racer Unbounded, a series that first debuted in 1993. In the same year, we also saw the release of the final mainline test drive game, with the slightly mad studios developed Ferrari Racing Legends. This was a series that started in the 80s. Two of the biggest hits from the 2000s, those being Criterion's Burnout and Rockstar's Midnight Club, were both completely absent in the last decade, aside from a Burnout mobile game called Burnout Crash. The games we were left with would also be missing things that we had grown accustomed to, things like multiple save slots, and in some cases, the ability to play the single-player campaign offline. Couple all of these with the rising costs of game development in general, as well as the players demanding more and more from their games, things like more cars, more tracks, or bigger open worlds, more events to take part in, etc, etc. It wouldn't be surprising if the number of racing games that are released in a year starts to steadily decrease as the decade goes on. Looking forward though, 2020 is shaping up to be a fairly decent year for racing game fans. We should hear news on the next Project Cars game, rumoured to be called Project Cars Revolution at some point this year. And speaking of slightly mad studios, their Fast and Furious game called Fast and Furious Crossroads is releasing this May, and hopefully it's good arcadey fun. We should also expect to see a new Forza Motorsport game releasing alongside the launch of the Xbox Series X. And of course, as I previously mentioned, we might hear some news on a new Test Drive Unlimited game, but that's just a rumour at this point in time, and I won't be surprised if it slips into 2021. Speaking of 2021, it's also the year where we can expect to see the next Need for Speed game, as I'm assuming the series will continue to be a bi-annual series. Alongside that, we might even see the next Forza Horizon game releasing around the same time. But one thing I want to bring awareness to is that if you are at all disappointed in the direction AAA racing games are heading, or if you've been craving something that's been absent for years, The indie scene is still very much thriving as the passion within the racing game community continues to burn bright, in some cases resulting in the formation of small dedicated teams that are aiming to make the games of their dreams. With projects such as Night Runners, Dangerous Driving, Street Tuning Evolution, The Driver Syndicate, and many more, there are plenty of smaller games to look forward to that could make up for the reduced number of publisher-backed racing titles. The 2010s were a transformative time for the racing game genre. While these games may no longer be the console-shifting titans they once were, resulting in the conclusion of some fan-favourite franchises, as well as the shutdown of a number of studios, but with the next generation of consoles visible on the horizon, as well as all the brand new ways we can experience our vehicular-based shenanigans, the racing game genre is still very much alive and revving. So for as long as we all continue to love cars, there will be no shortage of games dedicated to them. This has been 77. Thank you very much for watching.